Everybody, welcome back. This is the last lecture I plan on giving on YouTube, at least until I have to be gone from meetings again. But we are going to start wrapping up the American Revolution unit for IB history, and we're starting today with the third part, and we're taking a look at the overall effects of the American Revolution, what effects they had on the population, the people that lived through it. Also, the relationship between the United States and Great Britain, and in particular, the economic relationship that is affected here, because as we'll see, it really actually turned out pretty good for both sides, at least in the short term. So, again, war is always looming, it seems. But so let's go ahead and get started. So I want to start off this final part of the notes by talking about demographics, talking about the population. You'll notice the map on the right. This is showing the population density of the American colonies in 1775. So this is right as the war begins. The green is showing a much more dense population, as you would expect. These are some of the older parts of the colonies, is where most of the cities are located. And then the kind of beige color represents that middle level. I believe it says 15 to 40 inhabitants per square mile, and then the purple represents the least dense area of land. So we're going to see a trend that happens after the war that heavily affects maps like these. But the first and immediate effect of the American Revolution, we need to talk about the deaths, because of the 25,000 American military deaths that are encountered here, that's about 1% of the population at the time. Okay, that is a very large number, and it's only second to the Civil War in terms of relative population. So it claimed a number of casualties, but 25,000 American deaths. That's a pretty large number. To put it in perspective of percentages for our current society, we would be talking about 1% of our population being 3 million people. Okay? So imagine 3 million Americans dying in a war. That's going to have horrendous effects all throughout. I mean, it would have been one of those situations where most people knew of someone or a family that lost somebody in this war. So, don't be misguided by the idea that 25,000 is a small number. In terms of percentage of the population, this is a tremendous percentage, and one that we have not thankfully experienced too often in our nation's history. The second issue that we need to discuss is what happened with the Loyalists. The last, or perhaps it was 2 lectures ago, I talked about the peace treaty that was signed in Paris. It guaranteed that Loyalist property would be given back to them, but that doesn't mean that they wanted to be around to receive it. Overall, tens of thousands of Loyalists are going to leave the American colonies, and they're going to head to various areas, most of them heading to Canada, but you also have other Loyalists even heading all the way back to England. It's difficult to tell how many Loyalists there were. I mean, it's not like every single American colonist was polled, but as I mentioned now a few times, John Adams suggested it was roughly in thirds. A third of the citizenry was loyal to the crown, a third represented revolutionaries and rebels, and then another third was simply neutral. But most likely, the Loyalist percentage in the American colonies was probably around 20%. That's where most historians tend to put it. And I also will make the note, that's 20% of white Americans. We presented this topic as very one-sided. America is a slave society. And I'll get a little bit deeper in that here in a second. But the idea of loyalists just rejoining American society, that would have been very difficult. I mean, they lost this war, and they, in some cases, they had betrayed their neighbors for this cause. So many of them hit the road and never come back. As far as slaves, the impact that the American Revolution has on the slave population in America, we have documented about 20,000 slaves fought for the crown in the regular army, and thousands of others served in local loyalist militias. So the number of slaves fighting for the British here do number in the tens of thousands. So when the British are defeated, you have a mass exodus of not only loyalists but also blacks that had fought for the crown as well. Some are taken to places like the West Indies, Canada. Tens of thousands of freed slaves are going to find themselves in other areas. We didn't mention it as we were discussing the fighting of the Revolution, but as the British were going through some of these southern colonies, they were freeing southern slaves, and they were freeing them specifically with the intention of them fighting for the crown. So, if you're asking right now, well, what would slaves really care? I mean, which is worse, an American ruler, master, or a British master? It's basically the same here. Well, they're being offered their freedom by the British if they fight for the crown, and perhaps in one last ditch effort of humanity, when the British realize it's time to go, they actually do relocate tens of thousands of slaves that have been freed in this process. But overall, the impact on slaves is pretty enormous, and we're going to get quite in depth with slavery later on in our Civil War unit, and we'll hit on it quite a bit in Haiti, what is happening in that island, and then them eventually overthrowing their colonial rulers. But this is one of the first sparks that we see, for emancipation. But it just so happens that if you are emancipated, then you have to fight for the crown. So let's talk a little bit about the economic impact that the American Revolution had on the peoples of both America as well as Britain. And to return to a previous point, that loyalist departure point, I don't believe I gave an overall number there. In total, historians estimate somewhere between 60 and 80,000 Americans left for Canada and Great Britain. Although many did return back later on, we do see a mass exodus there. The reason I'm bringing that up again is because when 60 to 80,000 people, which we're looking at 3, 4, 5% of the population, take off, they're taking their jobs with them, and that creates an enormous not only power vacuum in terms of political opportunity, but also a major vacuum of economic opportunity. And so when their property and their land is confiscated and sold on the market, those colonists that are here in America, they fill that void very rapidly. They buy up that land. They take over those loyalists who were often being rewarded with positions in the government. They take over those positions, and the Patriots fill them quite rapidly. So, the economic impact is extreme. You look at this graph over here, comparing American and English income ranks late 18th century. So The red triangles here are representing citizens of England and Wales, those back on the islands, whereas the black little diamonds are representing the colonists. And you have this showing the amount of wealth that Americans are getting. They're not at the top of the food chain. Okay, the British that are the wealthy, 1%, if you want. At this time, it probably would have been much higher percentage. But the wealthiest are still going to be the wealthiest in Britain. They're not going to lose that. But as far as the vast majority of people that make up the British Empire and the American colonies, the American colonial population is seeing that their income is relatively higher after the American Revolution. Let's talk about the reasons for that. When America breaks off, we see that a lot more people participate in the market. We've mentioned before the vast number of farmers that were present in the American colonies, and that remains true. But now we're looking to trade more. Before we just sold our goods to Britain, we didn't really care. But now we have this opportunity to sell to any nation in the entire world. And also to mention that trade with Great Britain did recover. We did continue to sell goods to Great Britain, and we did see a lot of wealth return when trade with Great Britain continued. One economic impact that we're having, though, is that we're seeing the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And after the American Revolution takes place, domestic manufacturing, industrial manufacturing increases in the United States. One of our big focuses in the upcoming unit is going to be on the ideological differences between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. This idea of a urban elite that focuses on industry and manufacturing, that would be the Hamiltonians, versus this agrarian ideal of a farm life and trading our agricultural products versus an industrial product with Jefferson. But we do see Hamilton and especially in the cities in the North, we do see industry and domestic manufacturing rising in the years following the American Revolution. But as far as trade goes about, trade is moving inward instead of abroad. Yes, we do take advantage and trade with other nations, but there is a much greater increase in trade amongst the colonies themselves. Trade turns inward. There is a major demand for canals and roads connecting the colonies, and all of that facilitates more trade taking place. And when you have more trade, you have a stronger economy. As far as the population, expanding, I'll go back a couple slides and just remind you guys that this land that we have taken over, this land that now belongs to the United States, is frankly open for business. Proclamation line of 1763 kept Americans out of that, and now that they own it, and no Americans are living there yet, except for maybe some, crazed frontiermen, mountain men. People are going to start moving into the West, and that has a pretty big impact because it's not just open land. I'm not trying to paint that picture. There are people living there, but they are of the Native American variety, and frankly, they begin to get pushed off their land as the American colonies start to spread, now states, start to spread west. We see some of this westward movement, and it's not all positive. We see some ecological damage done because the land is not being used properly. You see some of these Indians, which we didn't really get into it, some of them did ally with the British during the American Revolution. So, the British have effectively abandoned those Native Americans that had fought alongside. And so you will have hostile natives in this area. So many of these Native Americans regard the American colonies as being the enemy. And overall, you see Indians being treated not as equal citizens, but they're being treated as foreign nations living in American territory, and they're simply being pushed off. We are not trying to assimilate them at this time. We will later on, but not quite yet. We're simply trying to get them out of here, whether that is by moving that population or whether it's simply by killing them. We are wanting that land in the West, and we are willing to do whatever it takes in order to get it. So, to rehash, you have tremendous impacts in terms of population, the demographics of our country, the economics of our country, and also in terms of the land that's being used for the American colonists. They're pushing the native peoples off of it. We have, even though the war has come to an end, there's a lot of conflict that still has to be ironed out. And the last thing I'll mention is that even though the British give up this territory, they actually still have a lot of forts in these areas, and they don't abandon those forts. Again, this will be a major point of contention when it comes to the War of 1812. Get the British out of American territory. So we're pushing towards another war already, even though we've simply ended this one. So anyways, hope you enjoyed today's lecture. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email at matt.turner@lsr7.net or shoot me a tweet at Mr. T History. Thanks a lot.